Hello, and thank you for joining us for our panel discussion, Together for Every Child. This is part of our ADHD Awareness webinar series, and I would like to introduce our panelists this morning, or let me start over, sorry. Hello, and thank you for joining us for our panel discussion, Together for Every Child. This is part of our ADHD Awareness webinar series, and our panelists today, our first panelist is Zena.
Hi, Karen. Lovely to be here. Thank you. I'm Zena Hicks. I'm a positive psychologist, a coaching psychologist and author, and I'm currently completing a doctorate on the efficacy of self-coaching, harnessing positive psychology for parents of children with ADHD. But aside from that, I'm also a parent of 2 boys with ADHD and also have ADHD myself. I'd like to also introduce you to Nina.
Hello, and thank you. I'm very glad to be here. This is our second time we are going to have panels all over the sea, and today it's very important. We are going to talk about the children. I'm the president of ADHD Europe, and I have just retired from my Finnish ADHD organization. So I'm a happy retired president. So now I give the virtual microphone to Arja.
Thank you very much, Nina. So my name is Arja Krauchenberg, and I'm here on behalf of the European Parents Association. We are an umbrella association of more than 30 members in about 20 countries in Europe that are all parent associations or federations of parent associations. And obviously, we represent all parents, not only parents of children with ADHD or parents who suffer from ADHD themselves. But of course, that is also an important group within our constituency. Back to Karen.
Thank you. And I'm Karen Sampson Hoffman, and I am the Director of Marketing for CHAD, Children and Adults with ADHD, and I am CHAD's liaison to the ADHD Awareness Coalition. The ADHD Awareness Coalition is CHAD, the ADHD Coaches Organization, and ADA, the Attention Deficit Disorder Association. Our 3 organizations represent the majority of people affected by ADHD in the United States. In addition to the ADHD Awareness Coalition, we also host the International Conference on ADHD, which this year is in Kansas City, Missouri, USA. And I joined CHAD about 18 years ago and have had the opportunity to work with hundreds of individuals and their families who have ADHD. And I believe very deeply in what Dr. Jean Arnold once said. People with ADHD are curious and interested and full of life. They are our explorers, and the world needs more explorers. Well, if we are ready, let us begin. So Zena, our first question is over to you. What are the biggest problems you are facing in your country? Perhaps, Zena, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so I'm based in the UK, and I suppose most of the diagnosed and recorded cases in most parts of the UK are well below population estimates. There was a recent task force, independent ADHD task force set up, and they noted that many children who would meet the diagnostic criteria actually never access those specialist services. Often it's girls that may fly under the radar because of their differences are less overt or less likely to trigger a referral or a recognition. But there's also substantial delays in accessing support and ADHD assessments. And in some local areas, the waiting lists are stretching for over 2 years. And in more extreme cases, they are not being seen at all. They're just getting missed, or they just fall off the services. And so because of this, often families are going into private services. And obviously there's issues with that because they're very expensive, which means there's an inequality then of those getting diagnosed. And obviously in the UK, we don't assess for any learning differences within the school system. So it has to be done through the medical system. And some of there's patches depending on, again, where you are within the country, on the information that has been received, and especially within the school system and within parents. So sometimes teachers or school staff, and sometimes even parents, are misunderstanding ADHD behavior, often being labeled as bad behavior, laziness, defiance, or even poor parenting, rather than a neurodevelopmental difference. And this can be very alienating for these groups. So generally, that awareness, widespread awareness, more needs to be done. There has been a sharp rise in awareness and also in treatment for ADHD, but it just isn't enough, sadly. How does this differ from your experience then in the US?
Well, what you were saying about a rise in information, this is a great time in history when we're talking about ADHD, because we have so much information available, so much evidence-based, science-based information, and you can gain this information from multiple sources. The downside of gaining the information from multiple sources is we also have a rise of misinformation in the United States. And so that is something that we are working to counter, to correct, and to guide people back towards recognized, trusted sources of information. When it comes to our children's care, we have a lack of mental health providers that can evaluate and evaluate children for ADHD, support them and their families. And we also grapple with health insurance to pay for those providers. Health insurance varies by location, by company, by state, but we are also, we have more recognition though of what ADHD is, how it affects the individual, and there is more support both for the individual, for their families, and for our ADHD community than we've ever had before. So we see a lot of success, and we have a lot of areas that we are working to improve.
Mm.
So let us go on. And so, Aria, what I was wondering is, what are the recommended supports for adults who have, forgive me, what are the recommended supports for adults who are working in preschool education, who are educating or caring for young children who are suspected to have ADHD or may have ADHD? How do you work with your young ones?
Yeah, I have to say that as we are a European organization, of course, that differs a lot from one country to the next. It also depends on how the educational system is structured in the countries. And especially when we talk about the early years, that is a particularly sensitive area, because in many countries that's not compulsory. So in most countries, the compulsory age for schooling starts around the age of 5 or 6, sometimes even 7. And we know exactly that at that age, it's already pretty late. So it would be better if we recognized and diagnosed children as early as possible, because early intervention has the biggest effect and can mitigate a lot of later issues. So what we recommend is that there is a system in place where also early childhood educators get this information, also get tools to understand whether a child, as you said before, or Zina mentioned before, is behaving in a different manner because of ADHD or because of some other reason. So that is not rolled out at all. Yeah. There, I think a lot of, even though we have good research already, but that has not been rolled out in different countries, not yet, at least. Yeah. In addition to that, we have the issue that in many countries, early childhood education is still not seen as part of the education system, exactly because it's not compulsory, exactly because it's not state-run very often. So people have the feeling that this is actually just looking after children, yeah, playing with them, but it's it's more a nursery kind of thing and not an educational setting where they actually learn something. And I think that mind shift is ongoing. We are further now than we were maybe 10 years ago, but it's still very much in people's heads saying, oh, poor children, they have to go to kindergarten because mommy needs to work. And not it's good for the child to go to kindergarten because it's a learning environment and it's a social environment that they need to start learning to deal with peers. Yeah.
Well, for both Aria and Zena, Aria as the voice of parents in the EU, and Zena, who you are working in this field, how can educators and parents best work together for a child's educational success?
I think it's really, really important that everybody's working together. And we, in the UK, often the parents are kept a little bit separate, not exclusively. There are amazing schools doing amazing things, but generally the parents don't have the information about the child until necessary. And I think it'd be absolutely wonderful for those educators, the parents, and the children to have a single language, a unified language that they're all using for something that's neuroaffirming, that is equal across the educational system, that children aren't separated because they're perceived differences, but rather they're working together holistically. And so we use positive psychology within schools to bridge that gap. So when we're working with the child and they're learning tools for self-coaching and self-efficacy and developing autonomy in their learning, then the teachers are using the exact same strategies and the parents are using the same strategies. So the child isn't coming home and having a completely different message. And I think that's really, really important. And using strengths-based systems, processes, language, focusing on what's strong rather than what's wrong. So enabling that growth mindset and a positive environment for learning. It's quite interesting. I'm not sure if you've heard, Michael Jelenic, Dr. Michael Jelenic had hypothesized that children with ADHD are likely to have received over 20,000 negative or corrective comments by the age of 10. And that's just from school. So if you can imagine what that does to a child's sense of self, it's it's upsetting. So the more we can change that narrative around and make it a positive environment, I think that's the way forward.
Yes, well, thank you. From the parent side, I think the same thing is true. We advocate a lot for better cooperation between all stakeholders, teachers, parents, other staff in the school, the principal, because we absolutely believe what you just said is true, that if there's a totally different movie at home and in school, then it's very confusing for children. And children in general tend to do rather what they see at home, because that has the biggest impact, and this is where their bonding is. Yeah, if that bonding hasn't taken place, then we add to the issues. But usually, children feel safer and more comfortable with what is happening at home. So if there's a huge difference between those two settings, then we are in for trouble. Not only for children with ADHD, but in general, that's true for all children, actually. So better cooperation is something that all children benefit from and all teachers benefit from, because the better the relation is and the more children get sort of pulled in the same direction by everyone, the easier their job is also. Yeah, because if they have to pull into one direction and the parents pull or the family pulls into another, then it's difficult for them as well. So better cooperation is key in education in general, and even more so if there are issues, whether it's ADHD, whether it's a child with some other kind of disability, whether it's a migrant child, or whatever the issue might be. The moment that this home-school relation works well, that is always to the advantage of the child. We've just finished a project, or we are finishing a project that was called See Early, where we talked about the importance of the early years in preventing or avoiding early school leaving and underachievement. And the research that was done during that project clearly shows that learning is a relational issue. The better the relation is between the child and the teacher or educator and the surrounding, the better the learning works for all children. Now, of course, there are barriers. Some are just in our head. As you said, parents are kept aside by the school or by the system because people are saying, well, we don't have the time, we don't have the energy to invest in this relationship, without understanding that this investment pays back later, and then you regain that time and energy actually. It might also be due to language barriers, for instance. I mean, in Europe, we have a lot of migrant children in our schools, and that is also, that communication can also be very much hindered if there is not the same language, not only in terms of expressions, as you meant it just now, do we have the same language? But there are actual different languages. Yeah, the language of schooling is different from the language that is spoken at home, and sometimes that makes communication really difficult. So investing in translation or in having coaches or tutors or whatever it is to have established good communication and then good cooperation, I think everybody can benefit from that.
Well, good cooperation, good communication is the foundation for any way that we can address and support our children. And Zina, a moment ago, you said a phrase about focusing on what is strong rather than what is wrong. And that's so important, especially when we are talking about what parents' perception is of how ADHD is influencing their children, and more importantly, how it's influencing how they parent, how their parenting experience goes.
Wow, yeah. Well, I think first, as parents, we're all trying to do our very best. And unfortunately, our external environment can heavily influence us. So what our families are saying, our peers, the teachers, what we hear or see in the media. And often we're perceiving ADHD as bad behavior, and that can lead to frustration, guilt, and even conflict. And then there starts that kind of blame and shame dichotomy. And it's really, I find it very, very difficult to hear the stories that are happening, because many of them can be avoided. And where we have even the family, you should give them more discipline, or don't do that, or that they shouldn't be doing that at this age. And these are not helpful conversations. The supportive conversation is allowing that child to be that child in their greatness. And often a lot of the challenges that come to light are systemic. They're born from the system that child or that family have to fit into. So if you're surrounded by neurotypical families, parents might find their point of reference very skewed. Oh, we're very different. So learning about how ADHD might present in its many forms, what differences might show up in the brain, then can actually help parents to respond with more empathy or curiosity rather than the negative responses or potentially punishment. And often those parents who see ADHD as what it is, or a neurodevelopment difference, not a flaw, and they can feel often more confident and grounded in their parent identity. And this can help them trust the decisions they're making and stay consistent. But often a lot of parents of children with neurodivergent children are lacking that compassion for themselves. So finding a way that parents can be self-kind and leading with compassion for themselves is showing to reduce that stress and encouraging a calmer home. Because again, when our child is, when we're worried about our child, a parent will often lead in to try and fix the situation. But by viewing those behaviors through a strengths-based lens is kind of reducing that need. It becomes more curiosity, and we're starting to see, what does my child need now? And that's decreasing. But some of the research that I've been working on has been looking at the power of the positive contagion for parents. So when parents can practice self-kindness and see ADHD and that ADHD experience with curiosity rather than blaming themselves for what they're doing wrong. And so just simply seeing things differently can have a hugely positive effect on that child. And in some cases, that's all the treatment, if we call treatment, the family needs. A supported parent, a parent that feels confident in their decisions and is able to share their love, because ultimately that's always what the parent wants to do. And that is showing a great impact on families.
If I can just come in on this for a moment, I think that's also true for all other families. And we do have a massive problem with deficit-oriented education in general. Our systems by design are deficit-oriented. That has to do with the historical development of how they came about. But it's really sad that 200 years after compulsory schooling was introduced, we are still there. And we have difficulties to get that out of our DNA, I would almost say. And what you just described, that parents are not able to get that out of their own system, shows how deep this education is within us, because we have been educated that way. Our parents and grandparents have been educated that way, and it's very difficult to get that out of the system.
Well, Nina, I have a question for you. Zena just said something about creating a calm home. But what happens within a family when the parents don't recognize that their child may have ADHD, or perhaps they have learned from a professional that their child does have ADHD and the parents refuse to acknowledge or recognize or act on or address the ADHD? What are those outcomes for that family? But also, more importantly, what are the outcomes for the child?
We have already heard a lot of what can happen, but I think that there's create a number of challenges with the family dynamic, both for the child and the parents themselves. If I think the relationship, misunderstanding behavior, then the support goes to punishment, academic struggles for the children, unaddressed learning difficulties at the school, avoidance or resistance. We know that dropout from the school numbers are big when the children don't feel they incapable, or especially if the ADHD is not understood in the school. Social challenges for the child, difficulties making friends, isolation. Then there can be also family attention. Siblings don't understand why does he or she or always get all the support and understanding. We don't get it. Parental stress. You never know in the family dynamic if the parents also have problems. Confusion, blame can we see also with the parents. Emotional and psychological impact on the child, low self-esteem, anxiety, depression. And when we look in a long term, it can be difficulties in adulthood, substance abuse, and like things like that. And then I can also think that there can be missed opportunities for support when the struggles are too big, so they don't look for the support. And then we have blame and guilt we can see quite often both in children and the adults' parents.
Well, for both of you, Nina and Arya, what has changed since we last met in a panel discussion in 2024? What has changed in your countries? What are any improvements or any new challenges that we are facing?
I can jump in and tell what has been happening in Finland. First, I want to raise up stigma, which has raised up its head again. Behind is many reasons, but I think one of the negative media has its challenges because nowadays when you read about ADHD, it's quite often negative. ADHD is also a real medical condition with lots of scientific evidence supporting it, and this is behind these media stories. However, people with ADHD often face stigma, which can impact them and their families in many ways. And stigma creates significant barriers to treatment and quality of life of those who have ADHD and their families. And now I can hear that a lot of overdiagnosing and things like that are in social media. Then we got a new law from 1st August this year in schools. And time shows how it works, but inclusion is something we can forget now. And we know already inclusion was something that wasn't very good because headmasters used that for saving money. They put people out and the classes was big. So that's something happens. And then we have also new treatment recommendation of ADHD, and it was updating. For example, work life is now written in them, and we are very happy for them. Then we also would like to see that all the doctors use them. That's what has happened in Finland.
Arya, what changes have you seen?
Well, not really exact changes. What I've noticed is that when I go out and I talk to people now about ADHD, because we have been in touch with ADHD Europe, we have participated in webinars, and we have tried to spread the message, if you like, and raise awareness, that more people come up to us and say, oh, this is an important topic, or I wasn't aware of this issue, or I've now investigated in my country and I found out XYZ. Yeah. For example, as I mentioned, the Sierra Early project, we just had a final conference in Brussels the other day, and our president, who is at the moment from Cyprus, she said, you know, I only found out now that in Cyprus, actually children with ADHD, they don't go to school, even though this is compulsory, but the schools don't accept them. And she said, I was so shocked. I had no idea that this was happening. Yeah. So I think what we are trying to do at the moment is specifically raising awareness, giving visibility to those families, not only to the children, but to the whole family, to say, well, this is here. These children also need to go to school. They need to be taken care of. They are future citizens of our societies, of our countries. We need to address these issues by giving better training to teachers, by offering support systems, and so on and so forth. So I think we still have quite some way to go. In some countries, maybe less, in others, certainly more. But I think it's important to keep this on the top of the agenda. Because what happens very often is you do campaigns, and then there's a kind of wave of awareness sweeping through. But then once the wave is gone, people forget about it. And then you have the next generation of teachers or next generation of parents coming in, and you have to start over again. So I think it's very important to make sure that this remains on top of the agenda. Yeah. Now, of course, for teachers, this can seem very overwhelming, because I was just this morning in another conference online where we talked about vocational education and training and what the teachers should all have as skills and competencies. And I know that many teachers say, this is just too much. You asked me to teach my subject, and then I should do digital literacy and health literacy and financial literacy, and what do I know? And I'm just one person. I have 2 hands, 1 mouth. I have 25 children in my class, and I really have difficulties to teach them what they need to know by the end of the year. So I think we really need to rethink our educational systems. Maybe already this idea of having separated subjects and you concentrate only on one subject is a bit of a very traditional way of doing this. Maybe that's not any longer what we need to do. Let's face it, in life, problems don't come around and say, I'm a physics problem or I'm a math problem. But the thing is, I don't know, I want to build a house and I need to have knowledge from different sectors. Yeah. So maybe we need to rethink of how we do this, and also foster cooperation among teachers, because teachers very often, they feel very, very much left alone. They have their class, they have their children, and the door closes, and then they are on their own and they have to deal with this. And I think that with all that we are demanding today, we can't do this any longer. Yeah. So peer teaching, coaching each other, but also bringing external support, whether it's psychologists, whether it's social workers, whether it's youth workers, into the schools and into the educational settings, and make everybody cooperate. There we are back to communication and cooperation. I think that's essential, and it's not only for children with ADHD. I think it's a bit true for all children.
It is true for all children and all of our children. And so that kind of brings me to our last question, and this is for all of our panelists. How do you see the future for individuals, for people, for families who have ADHD? What is it that we need more of, and what is it that we need less of? But hopefully we can end this on an optimistic note. Why don't we start again with Zina? How do you see the future?
I see the future of ADHD could be very positive if we choose to see it that way. So we need to stop focusing on what's wrong and start recognizing the creativity, the energy, and that unique perspective that ADHD brings. And that way we can give our children the belief that they're not only enough, but immensely valued. So my research, as I mentioned, explored the idea that when parents build that self-concept and that clarity of who they are and treat themselves with much more kindness, learning simple tools to manage stress and finding that like-minded community, they can then become those models of self-regulation and resilience. Because children don't just learn from what we say, more importantly, they learn from how we as adults show up. And by creating calmer, supported homes, collaborating with schools, and celebrating those strengths, I honestly believe that we can turn ADHD from what currently seems like a daily battle into a catalyst for thriving. And that's both for our children and for us. So we, as parents and educators, have the power to become that positive influence on our children. And the more we stop pathologizing ADHD and start working with differences and not against them, then the more harmony we can build in all our lives.
Ariel, how do you see the future?
Well, I couldn't agree more with what Zina just said. I think we need to take this on a positive side. That also makes us more resilient and increases our own well-being and mental health, which I think is super important for parents. And because, as you said, we are role models for our children. Long before influences existed on the internet, I think parents were the biggest influences of their children always. This old English saying, don't do as I do, but do as I say, doesn't work. We all know that that's very true. And that even small children, even if they play in a corner and you think they're not watching, they realize very well what you do and how you do it. So I think there we have a lot to gain if we are those positive role models. I know that in today's world, that is easier said than done because there's a lot of pressure also from the outside, especially, I have to say, on women and mothers. The gentlemen, have a different role here or still see themselves in a different way. So I think we could also profit from more equity here. Because this taking burden off the mother's shoulder and redistributing it more equitable in the family is also a good step to relieve the stress that might be there in a family and the tensions that derive from it. So I think that if we all work together, again, starting in a family, being a good role model for communication, for patience, for how we treat each other, I think that is very important, and that can also be a positive role model then for our societies in general. Unfortunately, what we see today, especially on the internet, in social media sometimes, with hate speech and bullying and all these kind of things, is not positive. And we have all interest, I think, to combat that as much as possible, because poisoning our own environment, whether it's the online one or the offline one, is bad for everybody in the end.
It is bad for everybody, but we are working to make it a better world. Nina, how do you see our future?
I think that we have to build up a better gateway to understanding, and how we do it, building relationships with professionals in education, healthcare, to better understand and treat ADHD's ongoing collaborative effort by creating supporting environment, fostering open communication between parents, educators, and healthcare providers, and encouraging more professionals to specialize in ADHD. We can ensure that children with ADHD receive the best possible care and opportunities to succeed. It requires not only awareness, but also a systematic approach where education, healthcare, and the community works together to break down barriers and provide support.
This has been a wonderful conversation, and thank you all for being with us and sharing your perspectives and your information. And to our viewers, thank you for watching our webinar and joining us to be part of this discussion. Thank you all. Thank you for being here. Check out our webinars on our YouTube channel called Broadcasting ADHD Europe, and we hope to see you there. Thank you again, and may your day go well.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.